In the ongoing saga of U.S. China trade relations, recent developments suggest that President Donald Trump may be facing significant challenges in his pursuit of a favorable agreement with Beijing. Despite his vocal confidence in the effectiveness of his administration's tariffs, reality on the ground paints a different picture, one where China appears to hold the strategic upper hand. In a striking turn of events, Trump has recently expressed a newfound eagerness to negotiate with China, hinting at substantial reductions in his administration's hefty 145% tariffs on Chinese imports. "We're meeting with China," he stated, aiming to reassure anxious financial markets. However, these claims were quickly rebutted by Chinese officials who vehemently denied the existence of any ongoing negotiations. Wei Jiaquan, a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry, dismissed Trump's assertions as groundless, emphasizing that any claims about progress in China-US economic and trade negotiations are baseless rumors without factual evidence. This divergence in narratives raises intriguing questions about the dynamics of the trade war. While Trump seems to believe that he can pressure China into concessions, the reality is that Chinese leaders are adopting a wait-and-see approach, confident in their ability to endure the current trade tensions. Economic analysts report that many Chinese officials perceive that they can afford to hold out against U.S. tariffs given their country's diversified trade relationships and the relatively limited dependence on U.S. markets. In fact, reports suggest that as much as 20 million Chinese jobs could be at risk due to declining exports to the U.S. Yet Beijing remains steadfast in its refusal to relent under pressure. One of the critical factors contributing to China's advantageous position in this trade war is the flawed premise underlying Trump's trade policies. The president has long maintained that the U.S. trade deficit with China signifies a loss for the American economy. However, trade is not a zero-sum game, rather it reflects complex interdependencies where consumers benefit from accessing a wide range of goods and services at competitive prices. Trump's belief that the U.S. can simply disengage from trade with China without significant repercussions misjudges the intricate nature of global supply chains, especially in sectors such as electronics, pharmaceuticals, and rare earth minerals. Moreover, Trump's attempts to rally America's allies around a collective front against China have largely fallen flat. Countries like Japan and members of the European Union have shown little interest in forsaking their own economic ties with China, highlighting the shared dependency on Chinese exports of essential goods. As one expert pointed out, the narrative in Beijing seems to have shifted. Their perception seems to be that the Trump team will come to them as the U.S. economy is suffering proportionally more damage from the escalating trade war. This sentiment is compounded by a lack of clear demands from the Trump administration, leaving allies uncertain about the objectives of such an alliance. Domestically, the political ramifications of this trade war are beginning to surface, with Trump's approval ratings plummeting. Polls indicate that public confidence in his economic management has dwindled to historic lows, with many Americans expressing that the tariffs have adversely affected their lives. This decline in approval could jeopardize the Republican Party's standing in the upcoming midterm elections, creating an urgent need for Trump to secure a deal that could restore a sense of economic stability. As the trade war continues to unfold, it is evident that China is not under as much pressure as Trump would like to believe. The Chinese leadership appears content to let time work in their favor, waiting for a moment when the U.S. economy may compel Trump to make more substantial concessions. With the threat of economic turmoil looming over the United States and the complexities of global trade relationships at play, the future of U.S. China trade negotiations remains uncertain, leaving both nations at a pivotal crossroads. The next few weeks will be critical, as Trump's administration grapples with the reality of its trade policies against a backdrop of increasingly strained relations with one of the world's most significant economic powers. In the unfolding saga of international trade, the rivalry between the United States and China continues to evolve, particularly as both nations navigate the complexities of tariffs, research and development, R&D, investments and economic strategies. Recent analyses indicate that while the U.S. has traditionally held a significant edge in corporate R&D expenditures, China is rapidly closing the gap, raising critical questions about the future landscape of global innovation and economic supremacy. A report from R&D World suggests that by 2030 China could outpace the U.S. in R&D spending by as much as 30%, driven by its aggressive investment strategy and rapid growth trajectory. Using data from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) and World Bank, the analysis highlights that China's R&D expenditure may reach approximately $1.45 trillion compared to the U.S.'s projected $864 billion, creating a staggering $586 billion gap. This projection underscores a broader trend where China's R&D intensity is already at 2.68% of its GDP, a figure poised to increase as the nation pursues its innovation-driven strategy and adheres to its 14th five-year plan, which aims for sustained annual R&D growth of at least 7%. The implications of these shifts are profound. With the U.S. government contemplating cuts to the National Science Foundation (NSF) budget by up to 55%, observers warn that the nation's ability to maintain its competitive edge in technology and research could be significantly undermined. Analysts note that the recent freeze on new NSF awards has already led to a 50% reduction in new grants compared to the previous year, signaling a potential decline in federal R&D support at a time when robust investment is crucial. In contrast, Chinese firms have been ramping up their R&D investments, with Huawei leading the pack at $23 billion in 2023. While this amount pales in comparison to American giants like Amazon and Alphabet, which spent $59.8 billion and $48.4 billion respectively, the trend indicates a growing base of Chinese companies enhancing their R&D capabilities. This diversification of investment could eventually lead to a more balanced competitive landscape, even as the U.S. continues to dominate in terms of sheer scale among its largest corporations. The ongoing tariff battle, a centerpiece of the trade war initiated under former President Trump, has also added another layer of complexity. Recent reports indicate that while some goods have been exempted from U.S. tariffs by China, the broader economic ramifications of these trade policies are still being felt. Trump's fixation on achieving a visible win in this tariff battle has led to concerns that his administration's approach may inadvertently weaken the U.S. position in the long run, particularly as corporate research budgets are squeezed. As the trade war persists, the forecasts regarding the R&D landscape are increasingly dire for the U.S. If current trends continue, analysts predict that by 2030 not only could China surpass the U.S. in R&D spending, but it could also widen the gap further, potentially leading to a scenario where China's R&D expenditure is 1.8 times that of the U.S. by 2035. This projection is contingent on China's ability to maintain its growth and address its own economic challenges, including a declining birth rate and aging population. The stakes are high, as the outcomes of these investments and policies will shape not only economic competitiveness but also technological leadership in emerging fields such as artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and renewable energy. As both nations grapple with internal and external pressures, the decisions made in the coming years will be pivotal in determining who will lead the next wave of global innovation. In conclusion, the trajectory of U.S.-China relations and the evolving dynamics of their respective R&D investments signal a critical juncture in global economic history. As China positions itself to potentially overtake the U.S. in R&D expenditure, the future remains uncertain. The coming years will be crucial not only for the two superpowers but for the global economy as a whole, as the implications of these trends will undoubtedly resonate far beyond their borders. In a rapidly evolving geopolitical landscape, the U.S. finds itself increasingly vulnerable due to its dependence on Chinese critical minerals vital for military operations. A recent report by Govini, a defense acquisition information firm, highlights that China dominates the global supply of essential minerals used in approximately 80,000 components of American weapon systems. This situation poses a significant threat to U.S. military preparedness, as nearly 78% of Pentagon weapon systems could be impacted by China's tightening export controls. The study points out that materials such as antimony, gallium, germanium, tungsten, and tellurium are integral to the manufacturing of military equipment across all branches of the U.S. Armed Forces. The dependence on these minerals has only increased in recent years, with usage rising by an average of 23.2% annually over the past 15 years. China's export restrictions, particularly on gallium and germanium, initiated in July 2023, and subsequent bans on tungsten, tellurium, and antimony, underscore the fragility of the U.S. defense supply chain. China's recent export bans have exposed in open secret, despite political rhetoric, the United States is fundamentally dependent on China for essential components of its weapon systems, the report states. This newfound vulnerability is compounded by the ongoing tensions between the U.S. and China, particularly in the context of military capabilities and regional stability. As Beijing strengthens its grip on critical minerals, the U.S. must confront the reality of its reliance on these resources, which are pivotal for maintaining military readiness. The implications extend beyond resource allocation. They touch on national security as the U.S. grapples with the risk of being outmaneuvered in a potential conflict. In a related context, the U.S. military is also coming to terms with vulnerabilities in its air defense strategy. A recent analysis pointed out that advanced aircraft, including the B-2 bombers, are at risk of being exterminated on the runway due to a lack of hardened aircraft shelters as at key military bases. With the rise of sophisticated missile threats from China and other adversaries, the absence of protective infrastructure leaves U.S. air assets exposed to devastating preemptive strikes. The Hudson Institute has noted that China has constructed over 400 hardened shelters in the past decade, while the U.S. has only built 22 in the Indo-Pacific region. The Pentagon's challenges in addressing these vulnerabilities stem from chronic underfunding and a lack of prioritization for military construction projects. Recent budgets highlighted a stark contrast between the funding allocated for missile interceptors and the cost-effective solutions that hardened shelters provide. For example, the Pentagon's request for $406 million to procure 12 advanced missile interceptors could instead fund the construction of 100 hardened aircraft shelters, which would offer a crucial second line of defense for U.S. air power. As U.S.-China relations continue to deteriorate, the need for a strategic reassessment of military infrastructure and supply chains is becoming increasingly urgent. The potential for conflict over Taiwan or other flashpoints in the Indo-Pacific region necessitates a robust defense posture, which includes not only modern aircraft but also resilient bases capable of withstanding the threats posed by adversarial missile capabilities. In conclusion, the interplay between critical mineral dependence and military preparedness presents a formidable challenge for the United States. As Congress deliberates on defense budgets and future military investments, prioritizing the development of both critical mineral alternatives and hardened infrastructure will be essential. The future of U.S. military efficacy hinges not only on the quality of its equipment but also on its ability to protect those assets against evolving threats. As such, a comprehensive approach that addresses these vulnerabilities will be critical in ensuring national security in an increasingly complex global landscape.